released today, post-Zapad update. It's dated late September 2025. And, well, this document gives a really fascinating, quite granular look at how the eastern flank is managing, persistent tension. It clearly outlines a pretty sophisticated defensive strategy, covering both physical assets and, importantly, informational discipline.
It is, yeah. It's a truly multi-layered document. It really showcases a region operating under, constant stress. Stability isn't just a given there. It's a condition that has to be actively maintained, almost minute by minute, it feels like. The central question this report raises for me, the sort of intellectual disagreement, is this. Out of all the elements being rigorously applied, what is the single most critical guarantor of that stability and effective deterrence?
Right, that is the core focus, isn't it? Based on the investment, the prioritization, and just the operational realities detailed right there in the report, I would contend that the core guarantor of stability really remains the disciplined, technical, and operational hard security. The physical preparedness, the clear boundaries, the strict adherence to established military doctrine. I think that's what fundamentally prevents escalation and sustains what the report actually calls the quiet skies.
I see it, slightly differently. I absolutely agree technical readiness is necessary. You can't argue with that. But when we look at the specific constraints the report outlines, it seems to me that resilience in this environment is fundamentally defined and maybe limited by information and communication management. Stability isn't just about having the equipment. It's about, successfully translating that military strength into reliable, predictable civilian function. If that informational gearbox, so to speak, fails, then the hard security assets become almost, politically and economically inert.
Okay, so my position is really rooted in the empirical evidence we see for operational effectiveness. Stability, I believe, is born from proven physical preparedness. Just look at the specific actions detailed, the consistent, very visible deployment of assets. They mention the caps layered on Baltic and Carpathian arcs. That provides a tangible physical barrier. And maybe more importantly, the doctrine is, it's absolute. The shoot if inside ROE unchanged. That kind of clarity, that confidence, it sends the ultimate deterrent signal. And, we can follow the money here too. We see capitals actively converting these immediate security assistance funds, the report calls them safe tranches, into concrete investments. This includes signed buys for sensors, jammers, SHORAD, repair spares, operator EW training, and critically, with monthly delivery SLAs attached. That high-tempo procurement with actual penalties baked in for failure, it confirms that the highest priority is technical capacity. This kind of military discipline, which they summarize as maintaining weekday discipline, ensures that immediate threats like airspace breaches or spoofing are physically and operationally managed before they can destabilize the whole region.
Right. That's a very structured argument, and it makes sense from a purely military logic perspective. But I would frame the context differently. Hard security, yes, it solves the military's problem. But information discipline, I think, solves the society's problem. And stability, it has to be societal if it's going to endure, doesn't it? The report itself identifies a really profound shift, what they actually term the constraint flip within their SCALE quick insight map. And it states quite clearly, clarity, volume, fewer, sharper messages beat drip feeds. Now, why is communication suddenly the constraint? I think it's because the environment is just so polluted with this constant low-level friction that maintaining functional stability actually requires effectively managing the expectations and the needs of everyone who isn't in uniform. Residents needing crisp need-to-act alerts, logistics providers requiring predictable ETAs for rail and trucking, local mayors constantly engaged in rumor control. If you buy all the interceptors in the world, but your civilian stakeholders can't trust your communication about, say, GNSS advisories or NOTAM timings, then the economic and social fabric, the very essence of resilience, starts to fray. Disciplined information management, for me, is the essential transmission system. It connects that military strength to functional, everyday civilian stability.
Okay, I do appreciate the focus on the civilian interface. Managing, anxiety and public expectation is undoubtedly vital. I wouldn't argue against that. However, operational adherence and technical control are surely the prerequisites for that public trust. Operational capability mitigates the specific and immediate threats, the things that could force an escalation or, a widespread system collapse. The report confirms that even under this persistent electronic warfare or EW pressure, control is maintained. We see the aviation and trucking sectors are still running, yes, albeit on degraded mode SOPs as standard, and air crews are being successfully cycled for rest. That capacity to absorb stress and maintain core function, even when it's degraded, I think that validates the disciplined technical approach. The analogy they use, treat the flank like winter ops, slow, layered, disciplined, it really underscores that methodical physical defense is the bedrock. It allows for degradation without actual failure.
I'm sorry, but I just don't quite buy that the operational SOPs fully mitigate the effect of that systemic informational noise. You seem focused on whether the military system continues to function, but I'm looking at whether the civilian system can predictably endure this persistent friction day in, day out. The source repeatedly notes we're seeing short spoofing pockets, sunset, late evening, and this continuous low-level EWNSS noise. These aren't single, dramatic events that get stopped by SHORAD. They're continuous, frankly frustrating disruptions designed specifically to erode predictability. And when we look at the specific edge cases mentioned, the fragility becomes starkly clear. They note, for example, EW overlap with medevac corridors. Now, that demonstrates that simply having the radar or the jammer isn't enough when your communication planning, the timing of those GNSS advisories, the NOTAM playbooks fails to account for highly sensitive non-military services. The real risk here, arguably, isn't a big kinetic attack. It's the continuous failure of predictability, and that's driven by informational fragility.
Okay, but the ability to issue those advisories in the first place and the knowledge that the system will survive that spoofing pocket relies entirely on the technical systems providing accurate real-time data, doesn't it? You can't communicate clarity if you don't possess technical accuracy underneath it all. You could even argue that the reason for the constraint flip is precisely because the technical deterrence has been successful enough to shift the conflict away from kinetic threats and more into this informational gray zone. Perhaps we're winning the hard security fight, so the adversary is forced to attack the softer information target, and therefore continued investment in hard security is actually required just to maintain this status quo. Let's maybe stick to the resource prioritization for a moment.
I grant you that the financial focus on hard assets is the clearest metric of intent. Yes, but let's look at the outcome that investment is supposed to secure. The report notes the markets, the zloty, forint, leu, are currently range-bound. And, paradoxically, they're watching next week's EU prints more than security noise. Now, this apparent economic calm isn't just a product of buying more interceptors. It's only sustainable if the information environment is successfully managed to sort of decouple the military tension from the economic function. If communication fails, if rumor control collapses, if logistics providers lose clarity on how the NOTAM playbooks impact their day-to-day intermodal cadence, then market and logistical stability immediately collapses. And that happens regardless of how many sensors were purchased last month. You seem to be measuring success by purchases. I'd argue success is measured by economic stability, which rests on that invisible but vital investment in keeping the comms tidy, as the report puts it.
Well, that brings us directly to the definition of deterrence itself, I think. I would maintain that the ultimate, the macro stability, which includes alliance credibility and that broad deterrence, flows directly from demonstrated technical capability. A strong, visible security posture, evidenced by those layered caps and the highly visible unchanged ROE, that's what prevents the catastrophic escalation. We are investing to prevent the macro shock, the big event. Everything else you described, the clear ETAs, the rumor control, that's all secondary maintenance, really, built atop this critical physical shield. If that shield fails, the society fails, regardless of how good your need-to-act alerts are.
But the report gives us a valuable tool here. distinguishing between the L layers, micro and macro, and that distinction is precisely why I argue for the primacy of communication. The macro layer, yes, that's diplomatic and military credibility, but the micro layer is the daily operational reality. It's the GNSS advisories, the no-TM timing, the specific guidance given to citizens and logistics about border crossings. They mention plan plus 10 20-minute buffers. If the alliance cannot master the micro-communication needs of its stakeholders, if civilians feel their daily lives are chaos, if the local economy is buckling under the friction, it sacrifices internal resilience. Alliance credibility, that macro layer, well, it becomes hollowed out over time. It's a slow, steady loss of legitimacy, I think. Hard security creates the potential for stability, sure, but effective communication is what actually converts that potential into functional daily reality. It's like having the strongest fence in the world, but if you never tell anyone where the gate is, eventually they might just try and breach the fence out of sheer frustration.
But that premise, while it ignores the fundamental truth that deterrence requires a non-negotiable physical barrier. The technical posture enforces the calm that allows effective communication to even matter. If the counter UAS TTP pack hitting version 1.1 wasn't actually effective, or if that disciplined weekday discipline, meaning strict adherence to protocol and defined escalation limits, if that were to lapse, the informational environment would immediately be overwhelmed by an actual military crisis, and that would render any crisp need to act alert completely obsolete, wouldn't it? Technical preparedness, I still argue, sets the baseline for the entire informational conversation.
And yet, if that weekday discipline isn't constantly and clearly articulated to the public and the supporting sectors, it just remains a military secret, essentially. We seem to be living in a moment where the primary threat is designed specifically to exploit the gap between military capacity and civilian understanding. The report, I feel, shows us that the weakest link is maybe no longer the radar dish, but the resilience of the local population and economy against this systematic low-level friction. So to guarantee stability in this unique context, you have to prioritize the factor currently under the greatest stress. And the data here suggests that factor is communication clarity.
Well, this discussion, I think, confirms that the foundation of regional stability, as evidenced by things like the high-tempo procurement SLAs, the dedicated conversion of those safe funds, and the rigorous refinement of technical TTPs like the counter-UAS V1.1 pack, it really remains rooted in technical preparedness and operational discipline. These are, in my view, the non-negotiable hard factors that ensure the regional threat environment stays manageable.
And from my perspective, the complexity of this gray zone environment means the true measure of success actually lies in managing those informational constraints. We see a clear constraint flip where sustained stakeholder trust, achieved through disciplined, clear communication, is the factor that transforms that physical preparedness into functional, predictable stability. The ultimate goal seems to be keeping the economy decoupled from the military tension, and that fundamentally is a communication challenge more than anything else right now.
It's clear, though, the source material shows us that both elements are being applied with incredible rigor and significant investment, which I suppose speaks volumes about the complexity of the current security challenge itself.
Indeed it does, but listeners, I think, must weigh where the true leverage point lies at this moment. Are the quiet skies sustained more by the technical barrier we see being purchased and deployed? Or is it more about the effective, transparent management of that constant, low-level informational turbulence that seems to define this particular geopolitical moment? There's clearly much more to explore in this material, especially as the next phase of safe sequencing is rolled out.